Welcome back to the Company Show. We tell like it is and we don't care how you feel. And we have another 2026 schedule, breakdown, preview, and prediction video to get today. I have already done a handful of other teams. So if you are interested in checking those out, go to my channel. You'll find them there. But today, we got none other than the Auburn Tigers. And I am excited to get to this video. They're one of Georgia's biggest rivalries. I love that game. So I was excited to make this video. So how did they do last season? Well, not too great. 2025, they went 5-7 overall, 1-6 in the SEC. You did, however, fire your head coach, Hugh Freeze, which I thought was much needed, but not a great year. When you go, they went 1-7 in the SEC. When you go less than 40%, that's right around 37%, and you're only winning 37% of your conference games, you're not going to last long. Just not a good tenure for Hugh Freeze there at Auburn. He went 5-19 overall, 6-16 in the SEC overall. I said 1-7 earlier. That was just last season. His overall record against conference opponents was 6-16. That's right there at 37%. It's not good. You're going to get fired. So I thought it was a good move by Auburn to move on from Hugh Freeze. I thought from the very beginning that he was not the man for the job. So who do you have now? Alex Golesh. He comes from South Florida USF. And again, this is another, I'm not sure how good this hire is. I'm really not. He had a decent record at USF. He went 23-15 overall. He was with USF for 3 years. First 2 seasons, he went 7-6. So teetering on a winning record. His last year, however, 2025 was his best year there, where he went 9-3. So okay seasons. I'm very curious to see what he's going to be able to bring to the SEC conference. This is obviously going from the American to the SEC is a huge step up. So curious to see how he's going to do. However, he does bring the offensive coordinator with him, Joel Gordon, so there is some consistency there. He's also got DJ Durkin as the defensive coordinator, and I do think Durkin is going to be a good DC. So here's the thing about Auburn last season. They were such an inconsistent team that I could not wrap my brain around this Auburn team. They had that really close game against Georgia, my Dogs, where I had about 15 heart attacks in that game. It was at home. It was a home game for Auburn, where we all remember the goal line stand that Georgia had, forced a fumble. It was a fumble. It was, flat out. I'm not sorry to tell you, Auburn fans, that was a fumble. If anything, it should have been a touchdown for Georgia, but Georgia got called down, and they eventually did score, but it was a fumble. So you go from having a close game with Georgia to losing at home against Kentucky 10-3. That's the game that inevitably got Hugh Freeze fired. How do you put up 3 points at home against Kentucky? 3 points at home against Kentucky. That makes no sense to me. But you got some change this season. You also got a very low returning starters. This team this year is mostly made up of transfer portals. 39 incoming players from the transfer portal. That is 4th in the SEC, I believe 9th in the league overall. So this is a completely new team. Not just players, but from the head coach down, which is always can be a bit of a red flag, a bit of concern if you are that team, if you're a fan of that team going into a season with so much change. Obviously, the landscape of college football has changed where a lot more players do, or a lot more teams do rely on the transfer portal versus recruiting. But that's a lot. That is a lot of turnover from last season to this season. One good thing you could say is that the offensive coaching staff does have consistency. Like I said, Alex Golesh, he's your head coach. You bring in the offensive coordinator, Joel Gordon. He was the offensive coordinator for Alex Golesh there at USF. And you also bring in Byram Brown. I'm going to stumble over that name. That is a tongue twister. But Byram Brown. He was the starting quarterback for USF last year. He had decent numbers, 3,158 passing yards. He also, however, had over 1,000 rushing yards. So not only can the man sling it, he can also tuck it and run, which for the most part, you need these days. If you want to be successful in college football, you need a quarterback that is balanced. The old days of just the traditional standing in the pocket, throwing the ball, is not really going to cut it. You need to be able to create some movement with the quarterback, and so I think he's going to be able to bring that. However, he didn't have the greatest spring game. In the spring game, he 50% completion percentage. I think he had 85 passing yards and 2 interceptions with 0 touchdowns. Those 2 turnovers are very concerning to me if I'm an Auburn fan. Again, it is a spring game. You got to take those numbers with a grain of salt. Most of these games, these spring games, you can't even watch, so you're just kind of relying on stats that you get from a news article by one of the schools. But did not look great in the spring game. But again, it was just a spring game. It was basically a glorified practice. So one good thing, if you were an Auburn fan, you can at least look at it and say, hey, we at least have some consistency with this offensive coaching staff because the head coach is the same, the OC is the same, and the quarterback is the same. They're all used to playing with one another. Yeah, they're wearing a New Jersey, but they at least are familiar with one another, familiar with the scheme. So that is one good thing going into the season. What are my questions for this Auburn team going into the 2026 schedule? Well, for starters, it's the question that I have for every new coach. How is their era going to begin? How will the Alex Golesh era start for the Auburn Tigers? What is this team identity going to be? And I look at it and I break it down into 3 different factors when it comes to how successful a new head coach does at a job. First one, without a doubt, right off the bat, is how are you competing week in and week out against your opponents? I'm not expecting a new coach to come into a program, unless you're Kirk Cincinnati, apparently, coming to a program and completely change it, completely flip it on its head, do a 180 in year one. If you're a fan and you expect that, you're going to be disappointed a lot more times than not. But how are they competing on a week in and week out basis? How do they look against their rivals? How is this Auburn team going to look against Georgia? How are they going to look on the road at Bama? What are they going to look like against Florida, who also has another head coach, first-year starter head coach at Florida? That is the biggest thing to me, is how well a head coach is going to do, a new head coach in their first year, is how are they competing week in and week out? Can they get this team up to compete every single week? You're going to lose games. I can tell you right now, I'm going to get to my prediction here soon, but Auburn fans, you're going to lose a lot of games this year. How do they look in those losses? I already mentioned Hugh Freeze got fired after a 10-3 loss. You can't have that. You cannot have a 10-3 loss at home against a team like Kentucky and be hopeful going into next year. You just can't. Second thing with a new head coach, how do they attack the transfer portal and how well do they fare with recruiting? Coming into a new program, there's going to be a lot of change. There's going to be a lot of overturn. You got it to be able to attack the transfer portal in a very calculated and smart way. You got to find out what holes you need and plug and play. At the same time, still being able to devote time to recruiting. I know this is a different landscape. College football is a different landscape than it was 5 years ago, and it'll look even different. We fast forward 5 years. But high school recruiting is still very important. So those are my big 3 factors in determining how well Alex Golesh does his first year at Auburn. My other 2 questions is, can this heavy transfer portal team come together as one in such a short time? I touched on it earlier. 39 incoming players from the transfer portal. That's a lot. How well can they come together as a team in just one offseason? That's going to be a huge factor in how well they do this year. And my last and final question for this Auburn team going into the 2026 season is, how will Byram Brown fare against these SEC opponents? He had good numbers in the American Conference, but it's a whole nother ball game when it comes to SEC. What is he going to look like when he plays that Florida defense? What is he going to look like when he goes on the road and plays Georgia, or when he goes on the road and plays Alabama? It's a different world. So how is he going to fare in this conference? Those are my questions for this Auburn team going into this season. So let's jump to their schedule. I've already talked about what they have returning, what they lost, my questions for this season. What I'm going to do is go through their schedule. After the schedule, I'm going to give my takeaways from the schedule, and I'll give my prediction. That's kind of how I've done all these videos. So they start things off with on September 5th against Baylor. This is the back-to-back, the second round of the home-and-home team with Baylor. So first game of the season against Baylor. Second game of the season there on September 12th, you do get Southern Miss at home. And then on September 19th, you open up SEC play with another home game against Florida. And then after Florida, you stay at home for the fourth week in a row on September 26th against Vandy. Those are your first 4 games of the season. After Vandy, you do go on the road to take on Tennessee there on October 3rd. And then after Vandy, which is a very well-placed bye week, or after Tennessee, my bad, which is a very well-placed bye week, there on October 10th, you get a bye week. After that bye week, on October 17th, you take on my Dogs. You got to travel on the road to take on Georgia. So that is back-to-back road games, but you get a bye week there in the middle, sandwiched in the middle between Tennessee and Georgia. After Georgia, you are back home on October 24th to take on LSU. And then after LSU, you do got to go on the road on Halloween, October 31st, to take on Ole Miss. So back-to-back Lane Kiffin drama there. I think that's funny. After Ole Miss, the first week of November, you go on the road, or you're at home to take on Arkansas. After Arkansas, you go on the road to take on Mississippi State there on November 14th. Then November 21st, you are back home against Samford. You should win Samford. And then, as always, to round out your season, one of the greatest games I love to watch every year, one of the most anticipated games, is the rival game against Alabama on November 28th. Now, you do have to travel to Alabama, to Tuscaloosa, so that's going to be a tough environment. So, that is the schedule for Auburn. What are my takeaways? What do I think? Your first 4 games of the season are all home games. It is very important that Auburn goes at least 3-1, if not 4-4 in those games. You got Baylor, Southern Miss, Florida, Vandy. I think you get a win against Baylor. You should beat Southern Miss. I'm not high on Vandy. If you watch my video against Vandy, I think they take a huge step back. You can very well beat Vandy. Florida is a very crucial game. Can you go 3-1 or 4-4 in your first 4 games? They are all home games. That Florida game, to me, is probably one of the most important games for this Auburn team. Obviously, the Georgia game is important. The rivalry game against Alabama is important. But Auburn and Florida are in the same boat this year. They have both been circling the drain for many years. They've had multiple head coach turnover. The coaching carousel seems like every 3 to 4 years, these two teams have a new head coach. Starting quarterback, first year in the system, brand new head coach. Both of these programs still trying to get their feet under them and find their true identity. This is a very important game for both of these teams, without a doubt. If you're an Auburn fan, if you're Alex Golish and you can't get a home win against Florida, it's not a good look to your first year. Flip it over to Florida and John Summerall. If you can't go on the road and beat a horrible Auburn team that's been circling the drain from years with a new head coach, doesn't look good. This Florida game is one of the most important games Auburn has on their schedule, and they should have it circled. You got to be able to find a way to at least, at bare minimum, go 3-1 in your first 4. 4-4, if you go 4-4 in your first 4 games, you give yourself a pat on the back, Auburn fans. That's my first immediate takeaways. You got to at least at minimum go 3-1 in those first 4 games. Second takeaway is this is a ridiculously difficult road schedule. You got to go on the road to Tennessee, on the road to Georgia, on the road to Ole Miss, on the road to Mississippi State. Granted, it's not the hardest part, but you still got to go there. And then you got to go on the road to Alabama. 4 of your 5 toughest games on the schedule are on the road. Good luck. Can you at least win one? Mississippi State is probably all you got. Can you win more than one? Maybe on the road at Tennessee. Maybe on the road at Ole Miss if they're not as good as everyone thinks they are going to be this year. That is an extremely difficult road game. Can you find a way to win more than one? If you can, it's a great season. I'll tell you that. But you have to take advantage of these other down teams. You've got to beat Baylor. You've got to start out 1-0 with the win against Baylor. Florida is down. I get that they have a new head coach. There's optimism in that program again. But at the end of the day, they're still a down team. You got to be able to take advantage of that. Vandy, I've already said I think they take a step back. You got to be able to take advantage of this Vandy team, especially that you get them at home. You got to find a way to take advantage of Arkansas. I don't think Arkansas is going to do much this year. You got to find a way to beat them. You got to find a way to go on the road to beat Mississippi State. You've got to take advantage of every single one of these down teams in the SEC and get the win. You have to. Those are my big takeaways from the schedule. So what's the floor for this team? I think the floor for this Auburn team is if Alex Golesh does just not have a good first year, this team cannot get it going. They cannot play as one unit. I think the floor for this Auburn team is 4-8. I think at the bare minimum, you beat Southern Miss. I think you beat Arkansas. I think you go on the road to beat Mississippi State. And I think you beat Samford. I think that is the absolute bottom of the barrel. The ceiling for this Auburn team, however, I think is 8-4. I think it's the opposite of that. I think you can beat Baylor. I think you can beat Southern Miss. I think you can beat Florida and Vandy. I think you can go on the road and beat Mississippi State. I think you can get a win against Arkansas and Samford. That's 8 games right there. What do I think? What do I predict this Auburn team going? I actually got you improving from last year to this year. I think that this Auburn team, Auburn Tigers, goes 7-5 in their first year against Alex Golesh. If you're an Auburn fan, I would take that more than anything. I think a 7-5 season first year under Alex Golesh is going to be good. Is going to be great against this schedule. I think you beat Baylor. I think you beat Southern Miss. I think you beat Vandy and Arkansas, and you go on the road to beat Mississippi State. I also think I got you beating Samford later in the year, and I think you either beat Florida or go on the road and beat Tennessee. I think you win one of those games. I think it's more important to beat Florida with the current state that the program is, but I think you get a win against either Florida or Tennessee. So that's my prediction. That's my thoughts for this Auburn team. I do have the Auburn Tigers going 7-5 in the 2026 season, first year under Alex Golesh. Let me know what you think down in the comments if I don't know what I'm talking about or if you agree. Other than that, over and out.